All right, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's Spartan Talk. We're excited to see all of you, so many of you coming back, and we're just excited to welcome all of you. For those of you joining us for the first time, Spartan Talks is a TED Talk-like platform here at Northampton Community College, and we have the privilege of featuring our elite adjunct faculty throughout the college. So many of them not just teach and invest in our students every day, but they're experts in their field. They're pursuing different interests, and they have come so that all of us can learn a little bit more about the world around us. And today we're privileged to have Mary Pickett, who serves as adjunct professor in English here at the college. And Mary will be talking about writer's block. The title of her talk today is Overcoming Writer's Block: How to Find Your Far-Seeing Place. Mary writes, as author Anne Lamott says, writer's block is going to happen to you. There is simply no way to avoid it, whether you're working on a paper for your English course or finishing up a chapter for your work in progress novel, or even writing a description for your upcoming Spartan Talk about writer's block. Today, Mary will be talking about this universal issue, and she'll be offering some advice from authors like Anne Lamott, Stephen King, and some of her own tricks and tips about overcoming writer's block. It's a talk that is relevant to students, faculty, anybody who has to write in their career, in their everyday life. And it's an honor for us to have her here today. Mary does serve as adjunct professor of English here at Northampton Community College. She teaches English 1 and English 2, as well as our ACLS course. She, when she's not teaching, she enjoys watching her favorite TV shows on her streaming service of choice, as well as, of course, as you can imagine, she's an avid reader and a diehard Dallas Cowboys fan, and is hoping that they win the Super Bowl before she retires at some point. And you know, we certainly, I don't know if we hope with you, Mary, but we certainly feel for you. And so, without any further ado, Mary, welcome to Spartan Talks, and the floor is yours.
Okay, just to make sure everybody can hear me. I get so nervous with technology, so great. Thank you guys so much for coming. Before I begin, I want to give a big shout out to Dean Grubbs and Professor Chen for making all of these talks happen. I think it's an amazing way for the adjuncts and faculty to connect with students and even other faculty members that they normally wouldn't be talking with or even seeing, especially in this COVID-like world. So it's great to see all of you. Good to see a couple of my own students. Hello, hello. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about how to overcome writer's block. And it's something that I've been struggling with, especially over the past year, and I would even say a year and a half to 2 years. Basically, since I haven't been in graduate school where my time has been dedicated to my writing. And I'm sure a lot of you guys, if you are creative writers, can relate to that. But yeah, when I was in graduate school, I taught a couple of fiction classes through my school in Fresno, California. Shout out CSU Fresno. And I used these two books right here. So I used Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird and Stephen King's On Writing. And I found that these two authors approached writing and, academically and creatively in two very different ways. Stephen King, if you're not already familiar with him, is an avid, obviously, reader and writer. And he approaches it from a very aggressive standpoint, to say the least. And Anne Lamott approaches the art of writing from almost like a more chill, relaxed, like, humanistic, if that's even a word, I don't know. But definitely it's polar opposites of how they approach the talking about writing and communicating specifically about writer's block. So I thought I would share some advice that they give. So I'm going to start with Anne Lamott. And I have this talk for both academic and creative writing, and I would argue that Anne Lamott's book is definitely for both forms. Stephen King's is a bit more creative because obviously he writes, science fiction, fictional novels for the most part. But yeah, so in Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird, she starts off her chapter on writer's block by saying, quote, There are few experiences as depressing as that anxious, barren state known as writer's block. And for those of us that have experienced it, we can definitely relate to that, relate to that statement. And so throughout the chapter, she basically starts by defining or giving examples of how people arrive at writer's block. So there's 4 ways. And again, you might see yourself in any number of these ways as well. The first way, I'm actually reading off of my notes. That's why I'm looking down so much. The first way is, she says, quote, "You come from a blissfully productive manic stage that comes to a screeching halt." So any moment when you have like, you're writing your English paper or your psychology paper, or even again, your creative writing space, you have maybe like, a one good day or a few good solid days, then all of a sudden it seems to be wiped away from you. That's one form of writer's block. The second form is, quote, "When you haven't been able to write anything at all for a while. So you're kind of stuck, in that, literally stuck within that writer's block. That would be me over the past couple of years. Number 3, or the third way that you may arrive at writer's block, quote, "When you feel as if writing anything that you're working on is like trying to level Mount McKinley with a dentist drill." So you're staring at this like huge paper. Maybe it's the final paper, maybe it's the midterm paper, maybe it's just your upcoming research paper. And in your mind, those 6 to 8 pages look like Mount McKinley or a huge, feat in front of you. And all you have literally in front of you is like a pencil and a paper, and you don't really know how to begin, the process of working on this paper. And then the final one, again, something that I can definitely relate to at this stage in my writing career, quote, "When you know where every idea, quote, and image came from, and none of them is fresh." So this speaks maybe more towards creative writing, but I know myself personally, whenever I sit down to work on my piece of creative writing, it seems like every piece of dialogue or every like scene change or something I've read before or I've seen in movies before, and it's not original. It's not anything that, I came out of my head specifically. And that again can be really frustrating because when you want to work on your own writing, you want to make it as unique to yourself as possible, and you don't just want to imitate the work of others. So after she kind of goes about explaining how various people can arrive at writer's block, she says an interesting statement, which it took me a second to fully understand, but when I did, I was like, this is such a great way to think about it. She says that she no longer in her own writing career thinks about writer's block as a block. She likes to think about it as just being empty of ideas. So kind of turning the stigma away from when you arrive at this moment, you're not stuck. You can no longer go any further. You're just kind of empty. You need some time. You need some space away from it. You need some kind of refreshment, to approach something from clear eyes, if you will. And, basically, it's kind of turning the concept away from, it cannot be overcome to it can be overcome with some time, with some reflection, or even just having somebody else look at it, especially with academic writing, or even creative writing as well. So she offers a couple solutions at the end of this chapter. And this is something that I've told my students many, many times over the past few years that I've been teaching. The first one is to basically try to write something, anything, get any words on the page. It doesn't really have to be about the paper topic or about, the source that you want to include in your academic paper, or even like, in creative writing, the poem or the play or the essay or the short story you're writing about. Really, it's just like memories. She says, quote, "Try to aim for 300 words of memories or dreams or stream of consciousness writing on how much people hate writing." Really anything to get some words on the page. And then, either you do that and you take a step back and you reflect on that, or you kind of do that and then your subconscious does most of the work for you, and then you're like, oh wait, what about this concept, or what about including this character, or whatever again you're writing about. So that's her first piece of advice, is just to get kind of anything on the page and see what comes from that. And then the second piece of advice that I, again, always recommend to my classes is taking that break. Actually, I spoke to my class yesterday, my English 101, about how they're doing in their rhetorical analysis papers. And a few of them kind of commented on, I do feel stuck in this moment. I'm not really sure where to go from here. I don't know if I can do the 4 to 5 pages that it's being required of me. So one student said that, he had a couple days before the rough draft was due. So he made himself kind of step back, take that break, maybe take a walk outside since it's been nice recently, go for a walk, go for a drive, or even do some other type of homework assignment, or go to your shift at your job or whatever. And then having that time away from your piece of writing, again, the subconscious usually starts to kind of work on it. And again, this speaks for academic or creative writing. When you come back to the piece of writing, you look at it with those fresh eyes, and that's why I'm sure a lot of other professors or faculty that are here today, we tell students, don't wait to the last minute, because you don't have the benefit of having that time, because you're rushing through the paper just to get it submitted, right? So, the students that are out there, that's why we tell you, get started right away, because if you do get stuck, or you do face that moment of writer's block or being empty of ideas, as Anne Lamott likes to say, you can take, half of the day, come back the next day, or even take a couple days, take a weekend off and come back on Monday. And again, it's always nice to have approach any assignment, whether it's an English paper or some type of bio lab or math equation or whatever other sciencey thing you guys do. I'm obviously just an English person, but anything that you're working on, if you have the time to step away and then come back to it, you will 9 times out of 10 think about something that you didn't think about the previous time, or know how to go about finishing it, or whatever the situation is. So that's pretty much what Anne Lamott, kind of says in her chapter on writer's block. And so I want to now move on to Stephen King. So again, his book is, I would almost argue, more about creative writing. It is a really great book. I do recommend it for those of us that are into creative writing, or just want to learn a little bit more about other, he calls them the, he says that his chapters are the writer's toolbox. So he has a lot of good advice, and he can be a little crazy at some points in the book, but for the most part, it's pretty good advice. So in his book, I picked the chapter that is more about, when you approach an assignment, or I'm sorry, not assignment, but when you approach a piece of writing for a creative standpoint, sometimes the biggest question when you sit down to write something is, okay, what do I want to write about? And again, approaching that writer's block in that aspect of like, okay, I want to work on like a short story or a poem, or, a nonfiction narrative essay, or, a play, whatever you want to write. But going back to what Anne Lamott was saying, thinking about, okay, well, every story pretty much has been told before. And that while that is true, pretty much every story has been told before. What you can bring to that story, and what Stephen King advocates for, is our own experiences, because yes, this typical story of girl meets boy, boy falls for girl, that sort of romantic trope has been told many, many, many times. Again, what you can bring to it is maybe a fantastical ghost story, or some type of like inner turmoil, or something else that again is unique to maybe your experiences, or something that you want to play around with. So yeah, so Stephen King's chapter, again, it begins, I like this quote. He says, what are you going to write about? Anything you damn well want, anything at all, as long as you tell the truth. And that is a very powerful sentence. And again, it's something that I used to teach when I was teaching fiction is, whatever you choose to write, whether it's historical fiction, romance, sci-fi, dystopian future, or even just, contemporary literature, you want to approach it from the truth, your truth or the truth of the characters that you're writing about. And then he says, and a little bit earlier in the book, quote, if you want to be a writer, you must do two things above all others: read a lot and write a lot. And that's just, you have to, as a creative writer myself, I'm reading a lot more now, thanks to quarantine. But normally I like to read, at least a couple days in the week when it wasn't quarantine time. But I think that when you come to a piece of writing, or you want to start, even working on something that you started a couple years ago, it can be difficult to, again, sit back down and get into it again, right? So he advocates for writing what you love to read, so if you want to write like a mystery thriller, which are very hot right now, in the world of publication and literature. You want to be reading a lot of mysteries, a lot of thrillers. You want to understand, the tropes and the nuances of that particular genre. So again, he says that you want to maybe start out by imitating other people, but then ultimately shifting from what they are doing into how you can make it your unique, or include your unique style, and talk about things that, come from your personal experiences, or experiences of like friends and family, or whatever the situation is. Let's see. So then he ends this chapter with, again, going back to writer's block, he coined the term far-seeing place, I'm pretty sure, or he mentions it in his book a lot. So I'm going to say he coined the term on it. And how he describes a far-seeing place, it's basically a mindful, productive space. So, a lot of students out there, and even people like myself who are working from home or writing from home or trying to write from home, we're not in our normal classroom setting, or, space in the lovely adjunct office that's like 100 feet from me, but I can't walk in right now, or, at Barnes and Noble, where I used to actually write a lot. Center Valley, shout out Barnes and Noble. They're lovely over there. So, we're forced to be working from home, or in our bedrooms, in our living rooms, in our basements, or wherever, in our garages or whatever. So whenever we get into, or whenever we're inundated with the distractions, right? Maybe it's family, maybe it's, our cell phones. A lot of my students I know have their cell phones on them all the time. In classroom and outside of the classroom. And whenever we feel like we can't focus on, again, either the academic assignment or the creative assignment, Stephen King says that you need to find this far-seeing place where no matter where you are mentally, you have that productivity. He basically, so that you can write or work in all types of environment, no matter who's around you or what noises are outside, or really, you can kind of funnel out the distractions and focus in on what you're currently trying to work on. Let's see. So obviously this takes some practice to develop. You can't, kind of sit down and like, okay, this is my, moment, this is my far-seeing place. You really have to work on it. And so I wanted to kind of leave the talk today with some of the tricks that I do to achieve kind of my own far-seeing place. And obviously I'm not an expert. I don't even pretend to be, but I just wanted to offer some helpful tricks, or even healthy tricks, to get a lot of us that are really, struggling with maintaining focus and even work-life balance and stuff like that, So the first thing that I do is I actually have a writing playlist. I've been cultivating it since graduate school. So since early 2016, I want to say, is when I kind of started. I used to play like certain albums all the time, but then you hear one Coldplay album and you're like, okay, that's enough of Coldplay for the moment. So I actually developed on Spotify. Shout out Spotify sponsorship. I don't know. I made I think it's up to 100 songs, 8+ hours or whatever. But I actually made a really cool writing playlist that I listen to whenever I want to, again, mentally block out whatever's around me. I mean, I could even be at home, but my roommate's on a conference call, or, the TV's on, or I hear the kids or whatever outside. But I want to kind of maintain my focus on the chapter that I'm writing, or the writing prompt I'm writing for my class, or whatever the situation is. So I put on that playlist, and it helps. It really does. And it also brings me back to when I, was at Barnes and Noble back out in Fresno, California, working on my thesis. And I think because I listened to the same songs over and over and over again, sometimes when you hear a song, it triggers a memory, right? A lot of these songs trigger those memories of like having that focus, which I'm not sure if that makes sense, but for me it does. And so, whenever I hear a certain song, I'll be like, oh yeah, chapter 5 of my thesis. And I'll kind of subconsciously, or even, consciously get into that far-seeing place where I can be more productive. And then another thing that I do, and this is actually a piece of advice that I know a former professor of mine told me, and I honestly don't remember if it was at Kutztown where I got my bachelor's or out in Fresno, and I feel so bad for not remembering this. But somebody once told me that whenever you're working on a piece of writing, and again, this can be academic or creative, and you have to kind of stop. So maybe you're in class and your professor gives you like 10 minutes just to get started on a homework assignment, or you have like half the class just to kind of work on drafting or including your sources or MLA format or whatever you're working on. And then the time is up and you have to leave for the day, or you have to exit out of the Zoom for the day. I never finish a sentence. So if I'm working on something and like the time is up, or my battery's about to die, or somebody is like, okay, class is over, I never finish my thought. I know that sounds a little weird, but I have found that, okay, if I end with like half a sentence and maybe some notes about what I do want to continue on writing with, and then I come back the next day, a couple days later, a week later, whatever the situation is, I kind of reread that last paragraph or the last few sentences, and I automatically know where I wanted to continue with. Because I feel like, again, I'm just speaking from my own personal experience with teaching and my own writing, but a lot of my students have struggled with, okay, where do I go from here, right? I finished this paragraph and I know what I want to say in my conclusion or in my next body paragraph, but how do I transition, or where do I go? So therefore, if you don't completely finish your previous thought, and you kind of reread the beginning or even the couple sentences leading up to that thought, again, 9 times out of 10, I'm not saying it works all the time, but it's bringing you back to, again, that far-seeing place, and bringing you back to that, moment when you were thinking about this thought. And so you're able to finish that thought and then kind of subconsciously know what else you wanted to say. So again, that's something that I've always done. I've never finished a sentence, or even if I do, I'll like make quick notes about, okay, what's going to happen next, kind of thing. And then finally, again, I'm going to echo Stephen King, because he does know his stuff. I'm not going to lie, he does. I read a lot, as a writer. I think you kind of have to read, especially if you want to be working in a specific genre. Me personally, I used to predominantly work in young adult fiction, but now I'm kind of jumping into mysteries and thrillers. I'm not really sure what's going to happen with that, but I've been reading a lot, over quarantine, obviously. And I'm currently reading this book called You Should Have Known by, I'm going to butcher this woman's name and I feel so bad. I believe her name is Jean Korelitz, I think. It's basically the book that's actually it's the HBO limited series, The Undoing, with Nicole Kidman and Hugh Grant. It was actually pretty good, but it's the book that's associated with that HBO show, and it's fantastic. So yeah, I'm usually reading something. I go to Barnes and Noble all the time. I subscribe to a book of the month club recently, and it's been great. So yeah, I'm always reading, and if I feel like I am stuck in that writer's block and I can't get to my far-seeing place, I just read instead, and then I find inspiration from how other writers write, obviously, whether it's their writing style or the plot or how they're able to, especially with mysteries, my fascination is how they're able to include, everything and have the twists and have the turns, and you don't know who died or who's the murderer or whatever. So if I'm reading about it, my subconscious can work to when I sit down to write the next time, I can try to imitate or, try a new style with my own writing. So yeah, I think that's all I really had today. Again, I'm not getting sponsored at all, but these two books are fantastic. Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird, Stephen King's On Writing. I do recommend, either of them for any of you out there that are interested in, again, not just academic writing, but creative writing. And really, we are all going to come across writer's block. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. But I think the important thing is to not feel stuck. You're not stuck. You're just currently empty of your ideas. And so if you take that time, if you allow yourself to take that time, you can take a step back, come back to the piece of writing, whether it's your paper, your poem, your essay, whatever you're working on, and you can approach it from, the fresher set of eyes that you had by taking that step back. So yeah, I think that's it. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Mary. I think that's very helpful for, I think, any of us that have to do writing, whether for our jobs or those of you who are students. And so, Mary, thank you for sharing that and for sharing with us Anne Lamott and Stephen King, not two people that I have ever heard brought together in the same place, but certainly applicable here, and they would do well to sign you to an endorsement deal, Mary. At this point, we'll open it up for questions. So if you have any questions for Professor Pickett, please drop them in the chat and we will share those with her. I'll read them out here. And we have a question coming in. So this is a question from Yushan. She says, hi, Professor Pickett, what do you think is more important to write a great paper? Read more books or resources, or write more thoughts about that paper?
That is a really good question. Let me think about that for just a second. Read more books or write more thoughts? I honestly want to say that the two go hand in hand, because especially if you're, again, working on like a research paper, right, where you have to include, like, my students have to include like 5 sources in their research paper. One of them has to be scholarly, kind of typical, right? And if you find that you are stuck on, okay, my topic is, this, and I know why I want to talk about it, but I'm not really sure how to go about writing it or how to, even go about researching it. I always say begin with the research, just because, when you're approaching a paper, normally you're approaching it from your own point of view, what you know about it, what you've heard about the topic, your personal experience with it, stuff like that. So, but normally, again, how I teach research papers is you want to include multiple points of view, right? And part of that is researching the complete opposite perspective, right? And so you might want to begin with the research, and then depending on the articles or the journals that you find, that usually leads into, your response about that research. So say you find like, I'm going to say like there's a journal, right? You find on the databases that we have at Northampton, shout out EBSCO, that's what I use. Say you find a journal and it's talking about a study that was conducted and blah, 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 numbers. And the research is maybe the study produced the results that were kind of shocking to you or you weren't expecting. So one way to go about that is by, again, including the information properly in MLA format, which I'm hoping that your professor has told you about, and then responding to that, and then letting your response lead into the next paragraph or the next bit of information. So again, they do go hand in hand, but actually, yeah, I would suggest beginning with the research and then letting whatever you find lead into how you go about, including it in your paper, your thoughts, your responses to that. Thank you for that question. Oh, it already moved away. I forget the person's name, but thank you.
Fantastic. Another question here says, this is very informative. I was wondering what you think about trying to write in a positive tone, but perhaps your mental space is not in the right place for it. Sometimes I get blocked when writing because of the mood or tiredness as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no, I feel that. That's honestly, I don't know who asked that question, but that is, I firmly believe, why I've kind of been stuck in my own writing over the past year, especially, and not to get all, mushy about it, but this year's been tough. It's been tough on everybody, and it's been tough. So yeah, it's definitely hard to write about positive things when, especially, your mental health is deteriorating or you're not feeling up to par. And I think, so my piece of advice with that is, again, writing playlist. Maybe you cultivate a playlist of like happy, upbeat songs, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a writing playlist, but it could just be like your own kind of like happy, kind of feel, go lucky, whatever playlist. I would, let's see, I'm trying to think of like a really good song. I would almost say that Happy song by Pharrell, but that song is so annoying. So please don't play that song repeatedly, because I think that would even cause you more distress. But you know what songs make you happy, right? So maybe make a playlist of like positive music or happy music, listen to that. Or, if this is creative writing and it's not for an assignment that's specifically due, allow yourself to take that time, like you don't have to rush into anything right now. I've given myself a year and I'm just getting back into my own writing. If it's not for an assignment and there's no due date, but you still want to do your own writing, try journaling. Journaling out your thoughts is great. I don't personally do it, but I know a lot of my peers, a lot of my friends find that, when we're going through a tough time, just writing those thoughts out on a piece of paper, there's something therapeutic about that, so I would recommend journaling as well. But ultimately just allowing yourself to be in that moment and feel those feelings, and then listening to happy and positive music or watching a comedy or a funny show. Yeah, I think that's the advice I would give you.
Fantastic. Mary, quick kind of a follow-up question there from me. If, especially for your students here, if they do listen to Happy, and they're writing a paper for you, should they cite that in Works Consulted?
No. I don't want to know that song. I don't know why. I think that I heard that song so many times when it came out and it did not make me happy. It gave me the opposite result of what Pharrell and the producers were hoping for. And again, if that's your song, no shade, you guys do you. Everyone has their song. Actually, that reminds me, I was listening to a song on the way over here. as part of my like pump up playlist. I have a playlist for everything at this point in my life. But it's Justin Timberlake, and I believe the other guy's name is Ant Clemens, and they actually sang it as part of President Biden's inauguration like concert thing. It's called oh my gosh, I forget what it's called. Wow. But it's a really positive, it has a positive message, basically. So better days, it's called Better Days. Like better days are coming, you know, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. That's a really positive and like almost relaxing, calming song as well. So shout out to Ant Clemens and Justin Timberlake.
Fantastic. Question here from Randy Boom, our distinguished faculty members here at the college. He says, I have a comment and a question, but they'll take forever to type. So Randy, take it away.
Yeah, so the comment is something you kind of alluded to, like really incidentally, but one of my epiphany moments in teaching has become like a cardinal rule for me, which is never assign something and let students walk away with a blank piece of paper. Like no matter how small of an assignment it is now, we always do some kind of brainstorming. If it's a big assignment, like maybe like 15 to 30 minutes, but like I feel like it's something that took me 15 years to figure out. And now it's such a no-brainer. Like just having people not leave with a blank slate and then having to stare at a blank slate just makes all the difference in the world. And, you know, I've probably been doing that like 5 or 7 years now, but the more intentional you can be about how they do the brainstorming, the more efficient it is for when they sit down 2 or 3 days later to try to do it from scratch again too. And it's just huge. Like just, it was like a light bulb thing for me.
Yeah.
So now the other thing I have, I don't know if this is going to come out as a question or a comment or what, but I want to hear what you have to say. So for me, like I can really relate to the idea of writing in a place, and like I have a bad habit of putting under otherwise wonderful coffee shops and stuff. Like I was Borders in the Whitehall Mall guy, then a Barnes and Noble on Grape Street or whatever that street, MacArthur, and Hava Java in Allentown. Like I can't remember even writing some things, but I know where I was. And so when the pandemic really hit and places started closing down, one thing that I learned very quickly is that I never ever write at home, like never write creative stuff at home ever. And I kind of can't do it. And the idea of like one of my problems when I write is I'm also that weird, creepy guy in a coffee shop that will talk to people just because I'm like insatiably curious. And so my lifespan in a place is like 6 months to a year, because then I get to know people and then I'm not productive. So I have to find somewhere else. But like even being used to that this past year, like not being able to go somewhere. And it seems simple enough, like with that, you know, the far-seeking place idea, like, oh, well, I'll make part of my house feel like a little coffee shop. That should be easy enough. Or carve out time. Like just knowing that places aren't out there has been such a hindrance. Like, you know, it's basically like got me at a standstill. And I'm just curious. I know other writers had trouble with that too, to some extent, or just with like motivation or inspiration. Like I'm just curious what you think of that, and particularly over the course of the last year.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Randy. Out in Fresno, I went to the Barnes and Noble. That was, I forget the street now because I've been home for about 1.5 years or 2 years, but they knew my name. They knew my order. I was there every Thursday at like during the course of the semester, even during the summer. And then the Barnes and Noble at the promenade shops, again, they knew my name, they knew my order. And I would just go there to grade too. Like as faculty, I loved the adjunct office we have here, but there's something about being surrounded by books You know, I think for me as a creative writer, I need to be surrounded by books and other people that are also working on their laptops or, you know, talking business or whatever they're doing. But I think, so like I said before, finding your own far-seeing place takes a lot of practice. I mean, I have my writing playlist, but that took me like years to cultivate, and I'm still working on it now. And sometimes like that doesn't help me enough, you know. I don't know if my roommate is still in the chat. I love her, but you know, she's working in our office space as well. So when she's working and on conference calls, sometimes I get distracted and I can't focus. And obviously, if I was living by myself or I had my own room, that might be more beneficial to me. But you know, times are tough. You got to have roommates, right? Or if you have family, you've got kids running around, you have your partner like not nagging. Partners do not nag, but you know, you have other people around you that are causing those distractions. Or even if you're living by yourself and you know, because of the constant news and the constant, you know, negativity out there on Twitter, on the news sites, on social media, that can just be a downer too, you know? So I know it can be difficult, but we have to put the phones away. We have to turn them to silent. We have to put them in another room or turn them off. I never actually turn my phone off. I'm sure it's begging for it at this point in its life, but I never do. But just, you know, allowing yourself even an hour, you know, if you can do an hour where the phone's away, it's in your backpack, it's, you know, wherever, and you just have like your laptop and you have the music that soothes you, or if you need to write in like a quiet space, maybe there are actually playlists on Spotify that are just kind of like instrumental, you know, or the Weather Channel actually has a wonderful playlist where it's like the Weather Channel music, which I know sounds really weird, but it's oddly relaxing. Again, that's my roommate's tip. Shout out to Tara. But yeah, Google the Weather Channel on Spotify. They actually have a wonderful, relaxing playlist. But yeah, it's going back to your initial comment, Randy. It's, you know, not being in your usual productive space, especially, you know, bookstores, Barnes and Noble, or cafes. You know, it's I think that's why a lot of us, like you said, you know, have been struggling, have been kind of stuck with our writer's block, with our frustration. But I think if we give ourselves like 1 hour at a time, so if you do have to be at home, you know, giving yourself that hour, whatever point in the day, you know, you'll be the most productive. Maybe hopefully the sun will be out, that can give you some energy, right? Put the phone away, put on some relaxing music. And, you know, if you can't write anything, I'll go back to what Anne Lamott said, just kind of stream of consciousness, get the ideas out, get your frustrations out. You know, it might just be one full page of you just like screaming obscenities to the void, you know, but you're still producing something, and that can be really cathartic as well. So yeah, that's again my piece of advice, but I completely feel what you're going through, Randy. I miss my Barnes and Noble so much. I really do. It was such a great space, and everyone there was just so friendly. So hopefully, you know, in the next 6 months to a year, we can all go back to going to our local bookstores and Barnes and Nobles. But yeah, thank you for that.
Randy has another comment here. He says Airbnb is a godsend and a cheap way to get a retreat, which I think is fantastic advice. You don't have to spend a lot and go far, right, to get a bit of a writer's retreat.
Mm-hmm.
If there are other questions, please drop them in the chat. And while we have a little bit more time here, and while we do that, Mary, a question from me. You mentioned before the idea of turning off your phone. Mm-hmm. I'm curious about your thoughts on how the digital world has impacted writing and that writing process. And there's been studies done on even how we read today, and the idea of what we call the F-style reading, where we read the top line on the website, we kind of scan down a little bit, we read the middle line, and we scan down to the side a little bit more. And the idea that we're going so fast on information that we're not really comprehending understanding, and that in turn impacts our writing. I'm curious what your thoughts on that are and what your thoughts are on unplugging to write more effectively.
Yeah, so I'll respond to the scanning while reading thing first. And I might forget the second part that you asked me while I'm responding to that. So just remind me, my memory is really bad when I don't have like a question in front of me. But yeah, actually your initial question about, I mean, I do it. I think we all do it, right? I do it. Like I look at the headline, I'm like, oh, I wonder what that's about. Then I kind of, oh, there's a picture, there's a graph. Okay, I don't really care. You know, I'm a visual person. I like pictures and graphs when I'm reading my own articles and stuff. But there's obviously a danger to that, right? Because I actually used to, my bachelor's degree was technically in journalism at Kutztown, but they called it professional writing to be fancy. So I actually worked at the Morning Call during my last semester there in like 2012 or 2013. Shout out the Morning Call. They were fantastic. But part of that was knowing, you know, what to put in a headline so that you're one, catching the reader's attention, but two, trying to give them an accurate representation of what the article is going to be about. I can't really speak for the news because I worked in entertainment, surprise, surprise. But, you know, I think it's all about, you know, especially with the digital age, getting those likes, getting those views, you know, breaking the news first. And it doesn't matter if the news is accurate, but it has to be read first on this news site or this organization site. And obviously, you know, fake news and false news and even just, you know, people misleading with the headlines and giving the readers a biased point of view or not all the information, that's where the danger comes. I would just say to that, there is an article that I like to give to my students when we approach the research paper. And for those of us that are still there, you will read it in the next month. It's from, I forget his first name. I'm so bad at this, but it's an article called Is Google Making Us Stupid? And it's been out there for like almost 10 or so years now. Something Carr, forget his first name, but it's something Carr, like C-A-R-R. And he talks about that. He talks about how all this technology and being able to Google stuff and being able to read the news, you know, the news headlines so quickly, we're not getting the most accurate bit of information or we're not retaining it, like you said, Sam. So, you know, it's a double-edged sword of like, it's great to have all this technology. I mean, obviously, that's how we're doing this. That's how we've been surviving over Zoom and Microsoft Teams over the last almost, you know, a year or more than a year. But, you know, there's a detriment to that. And I personally, I like technology because it keeps us all connected in a positive way, and it can. When I was out in California, I was always messaging my friends back home and my family back home, and you know, FaceTiming and everything, and it was great. But you know, there's obviously a lot of internet bullying, internet stalking, you know, murders. Like back in the day, there was the Craigslist murder. I think he was one of the first ones that used, you know, Craigslist and the internet for a very negative and dark way. And in terms of, did I answer the first question? So I'm kind of going into the second one right now.
Yes.
Okay. So in terms of like unplugging to, again, get into your own work, whether it's academic or creative, I actually used to like handwrite my assignments. I hand wrote my thesis, and that was 150 pages typed. I know I'm crazy. I know. People, yeah, I've gotten that look so many times before when I say that, but I'm a handwriter. Over the past couple years, I've decided my hand gets kind of cramped, and I think I'm developing some type of carpal tunnel because of that. So I'm moving on to just typing it out. But again, if you are using your laptop to type out assignments and you have like a Mac where you can see your text messages, you can see your Facebook stuff, and it just comes at you, just disable that or turn the internet off, you know, especially if you don't need like a source for whatever you're writing. Anytime that you can literally like deplug, like put the phone away, turn off the notifications on the computer you're typing on or you're working on. Again, if you don't need the internet for that particular moment, I would always recommend And if even if you do need the internet for research or for whatever, it all goes down, or all comes back to like having that self-control. Like, okay, I do have to research this particular article. I have to look through the article and I have to like, understand it for this paper. If you can print out the article, if you have like a printer and it's not too long of an article, so you can actually highlight things like on the piece of paper. Like I said, I have a printed copy of my notes right now. So obviously I love paper, and I would use a lot more of it because of COVID. Obviously I can't this semester. But yeah, if you have a printer, print out the articles that you want to include, and highlight certain things and circle certain things. And that will also, take away from your time on the internet when you're working on your paper. Yeah, but again, that's if you obviously don't have a printer, or you don't want to waste like 20 pages. It's just having the self-control, which I know can be really hard, especially for, students that are having a lot of, work, family, and even those of us that are older and have a lot of things going on. But, you need to prioritize your assignments, because you are all here at Northampton for a reason. And, part of being an adult and being an educated individual, and just the learning process, is learning how you can and cannot study, and how you can and cannot, focus. Because once you get out into the real world, your boss won't care that you got distracted by a 20-minute YouTube video, So if you mastered he might or might not care, I don't know. But if you mastered these skills now, or at least know what works for you now, it's trial and error for a lot of it. But I think it'll only benefit you as you get older and you have other opportunities in front of you. I'm not sure if that answered your question, because I kind of went on a rant, but sorry, I do that.
No, that's fantastic. And in my field is in political science. Former Supreme Court Justice David Souter notoriously never typed up any of his opinions. He wrote them on legal pad by hand, and had his clerks type them up. And so you're in good company, Mary. Mary Pickett and Justice David Souter in a class of their own.
Here we go.
So, well, that is, we are at time, just about time. And so, Mary, again, I want to say thank you to you and to everyone here for attending. We did drop that article that Mary mentioned, Is Google Making Us Stupid, from The Atlantic. It is dropped in the chat. And then, Mary, one more time, could you give us the book titles again? Some people are asking for them, and I will drop those in the chat right now.
Yes. So Stephen King's On Writing, and then Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird. And obviously I use them a lot, so I've got sticky notes.
All right.
Yeah.
And
actually, oh no, I'm sorry. This book, Bird by Bird, actually just hit its 25th anniversary. So I believe she also released this is obviously the older version, but she did re-release it. So I'm sure the newer version has like maybe more material or more bits of advice. So if you can get the newer version, I'd recommend that.
Okay, very good. So both of those book titles are in the chat as well. Again, Mary, thank you so much for taking the time to share this with all of us, and I certainly benefited from it. And I think all of us here did as well. I want to invite all of you back next week, right here, same time, same place. Professor Mike McGovern is going to be joining us for a talk about baseball. So we're changing it up a little bit, from writing to the ballpark. And just in time for opening day. So if you're like me and you are a huge baseball fanatic, next week's talk is going to be perfect. I actually have done some of my best writing at ballparks. Usually when my team is so far back that I need to get the angst out, I start writing on the notepad on my phone. But we want to welcome you guys back here next week, 11 o'clock with Professor McGovern for another Spartan talk on baseball. But again, for today, Mary, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
thank you for this talk. And we wish all of you a fantastic week, and we'll see you back here next week.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.